On September 21st, 1996, a 15-year-old girl in Belgrade, Montana, asked her mother for permission to drive to the river. She wanted to clear her head. There had been a small argument at home, the kind that happens in every family, the kind that nobody remembers afterward. Her mother said yes. Danielle Houchins, who everyone called Danny, climbed into her truck wearing blue jeans and a gray sweatshirt and drove a few miles south toward the Gallatin River. She was going to Cameron Bridge Fishing Access, a quiet stretch of riverbank where locals went to fish, to think, to breathe. She had been there before. It was the kind of place that felt safe because nothing had ever happened there. Her water bottle was with her. Her keys were in her hand. She never came home. Before we go any further, there is something I want to say from the heart. More than 90% of the people watching right now have not subscribed yet, and perhaps that would not matter so much if these stories were just words. But they are not. They are pieces of real lives, pieces of real families, pieces of moments that changed everything forever. So if you have found meaning, or even a little bit of yourself in these stories, please take a moment to subscribe. It is completely free, and it helps this community continue. And while you are here, I want to know, what feeling brought you to this video tonight? Tell me in the comments below. When Danny did not come home that afternoon, her mother, Cheryl Houchins, went looking for her. She drove to Cameron Bridge and found Danny's truck sitting in the parking area. Unlocked. Empty. The engine was off. There was no note, no sign of where Danny had gone. A few feet away from the truck, on the trail leading toward the river, Cheryl found Danny's keys and her water bottle lying on the ground in the middle of the path. Not off to the side, not dropped near a bench or a tree. In the middle of the trail, as if they had been let go suddenly, as if whatever came next had not allowed time to set them down properly. Cheryl began searching. She called out. She walked the trail. She found nothing. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office and Search and Rescue were called in that evening. They searched the area but had to stop when darkness made it too dangerous to continue. They would resume in the morning. They did not have to wait that long. Several hours after Danny went missing, family friends who had joined the search found her. She was in a marshy area near Cameron Bridge, hidden beneath a willow tree. She was face down in shallow water. The position of her body told investigators she had not simply fallen. She had been dragged there and left. Danny Houchins was 15 years old. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office processed the scene. Danny's body was transported to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula for autopsy. What the medical examiner found ruled out any possibility of accident. There was no significant water in her lungs, the kind that accumulates in a true drowning. What was found instead was mud. A stomach full of mud. A retired detective who later worked the case put it plainly. People drown all the time, and what you find is water in their lungs. What they found in Danielle was mud. That does not happen in a drowning. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She had been held face down in the shallow, marshy water of the riverbank and suffocated there, in a few inches of mud, beneath a willow tree on a Saturday afternoon. The autopsy also found evidence of sexual assault. Foreign DNA was recovered from her body. That DNA went into evidence storage at the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office, and it stayed there for a long time. Investigators worked the case in the weeks and months that followed. They interviewed people who had been at Cameron Bridge that day or near it. They looked at local men, at anyone with a connection to the area or to Danny, at anyone whose alibi did not hold cleanly. Dozens of suspects were interviewed across the life of the investigation. None of them could be connected to the crime through physical evidence. There were no witnesses to what happened beneath that willow tree. No one who had seen anything useful. The foreign DNA sat in the evidence file with no name attached to it. By the time 1997 arrived, the case had slowed. By the time 1998 arrived, it had effectively stopped. Danny Houchins was Belgrade's unsolved murder. She was 15, and her case had no suspect, no arrest, no answer. Her younger sister Stephanie was a child when Danny died. She grew up in the absence of her. She has said that she has been without her big sister for 2/3 of her life. She described Danny as someone everybody loved, someone with a dry, precise sense of humor, someone who showed you she cared about you by playing tricks on you. That was just who she was, Stephanie said. That was the shape of what the family lost on September 21st, 1996. And it was also the shape of what they carried every year after. The years passed the way they do in unsolved cases. Danny's mother waited. Stephanie waited. The sheriff's office moved through new cases and new administrations. The file stayed open. It did not move. Stephanie grew from a child into a teenager into a woman in her 30s. All of it happened in the shadow of what had not been answered. The case had become the county's oldest active homicide by the time anyone looked at it seriously again. It had been sitting for nearly 2 decades when a new wave of attention briefly reached it. And then it sat again. In 2019, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office reopened the Houchins case formally, committing resources to it again for the first time in years. The office worked alongside Danny's family, reopening a wound that had never fully closed in order to have another chance at closing it properly. Stephanie said later that the family was willing to do that, willing to go back through all of it, to look at the evidence again, to wait again, because the alternative was letting the case disappear into a filing cabinet with no conclusion. They had already done that once. They were not willing to do it a second time. When Dan Springer became Gallatin County Sheriff in 2021, he brought in 2 outside specialists from California to take fresh eyes to the evidence. The first was Tom Elfmont, a retired Los Angeles Police Department officer who worked as a private investigator. The second was Sergeant Court Depweg, a specialist in using modern DNA technology to solve homicide cases that conventional investigation had failed to close. Both men reviewed the original evidence collected from Danny's body at the Cameron Bridge scene in 1996. The key piece was 4 hairs. 4 hairs that had been collected from Danny's body at the crime scene 25 years earlier and preserved in the evidence file. Small, easy to overlook, easy to undervalue. Kept in storage for a quarter-century waiting for technology to catch up to what they contained. The hairs were first sent to a forensics laboratory where a partial DNA profile was developed and submitted to CODIS, the FBI's national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders. The system checks the crime scene profile against every profile in its database. If the person who left biological material at a crime scene has been convicted of a qualifying offense and submitted a DNA sample, the database returns a match. If they have not, it returns nothing. Nothing came back on Danny's case. The man who attacked her at Cameron Bridge in 1996 was not in CODIS. That did not mean he had no record. It meant whatever he had done before or after that afternoon, he had never been required to submit a DNA sample. His profile had never entered the federal system. The hairs went to another laboratory. The DNA profile developed from those 4 hairs was sent to a lab in Virginia that specializes in forensic genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy works on a completely different principle than SODIS. Instead of matching crime scene DNA against convicted offenders, it uploads the profile to public ancestry databases where ordinary people have submitted their DNA voluntarily to trace their family history. If anyone in those databases shares enough DNA with the crime scene sample, it means they are biologically related to whoever left it. The degree of shared DNA indicates how closely related. From there, genealogists build a family tree, working backward through generations and forward through branches, using public records to narrow the field. Birth certificates, death records, marriage licenses, census data, old obituaries. The work is slow and methodical. It requires patience and precision. And it produced a result. The forensic genealogy analysis pointed to Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson. He was 55 years old. He lived in Dillon, Montana, roughly 100 miles from Belgrade and from Cameron Bridge. He had a wife. He had 2 children, a daughter around the age of 20 and a younger son. He had been a graduate student at Montana State University in Bozeman in September of 1996, the month Danny was killed. He had been new to the area. He had no prior connection to Danny Houchins. No one who knew her recognized his name. He had never appeared on a single list during the original investigation. He was not in Belgrade when investigators were canvassing. He was a stranger. Investigators and the victim's family came to believe that what happened at Cameron Bridge that afternoon was a crime of opportunity. Hutchinson encountered Danny alone at the river access site by chance. He had only been in the Bozeman area a short time. Within weeks, he was gone, and the case sat cold for nearly 3 decades while he built a life somewhere else. On July 23, 2024, Tom Elfmont and Sergeant Court Depweg drove to Dillon and sat down with Paul Hutchinson at his home. They discussed Danny's case. They did not tell him what the DNA had already shown. During the nearly 2-hour interview, Hutchinson exhibited signs of nervousness and erratic behavior that the investigators noted. They left without arresting him. There was still one more step to confirm what the genealogy had identified. A direct DNA sample from Hutchinson was needed to turn a genetic match into a confirmed match. They had their interview. They had their behavioral observations. They drove back and waited. 12 hours after that interview ended, Paul Hutchinson was dead. He died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his home in Dillon. He was 55 years old. He had not been arrested. He had not been charged. He had been interviewed by 2 investigators who asked him about a murder from 1996, and by the following morning, he was gone. After the interview, and after his death, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office completed the DNA comparison between the profile developed from the 4 hairs and a sample obtained from Hutchinson. The result was a 100% match. The DNA recovered from Danny Houchin's body in September of 1996 belonged to Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson. Sheriff Dan Springer held a press conference on August 8, 2024. He described what investigators had found and how they had found it. He described Hutchinson as a man who had committed a crime of opportunity, an evil man who had taken the life of an innocent and lovely 15-year-old girl. He said the case exemplified the office's relentless pursuit of justice. He said they had never given up finding the truth for Danny and her family. He also said something about the Hutchinson family, the wife, the children, the people who had lived alongside this man for decades without knowing what he carried. He said he felt sorrow for them. They were unaware, he said, and in many ways, they were victims of this man too. Stephanie Houchin spoke at that press conference. She had waited 28 years for a day like that one. She said that after nearly 28 years without answers, without justice, they were celebrating. But she also said something that needed to be said without softening. She said that the institutions designed to protect the rights of victims, to ensure that vicious killers are incarcerated, to deliver justice in Montana, had failed her sister, had failed her family, had failed the community. She did not say it to erase what the sheriff's office had done in reopening the case, or what the investigators had done in the final push. She said it because it was true, and because Danny deserved a witness who would say it out loud. Her sister had been 15. She had asked her mother for permission to go to the river to clear her head after a small argument. She had driven a few miles on a Saturday afternoon to a place where nothing bad had ever happened. She never came home. And for 28 years, the man who killed her raised children, lived in a house, and drove the same Montana roads that Danny never got to grow old on. The 4 hairs collected from her body in 1996 were still there when the technology arrived to read them. That is what held the case together across 3 decades of waiting. Not a confession, not a witness who finally came forward. 4 hairs kept in an evidence file in a county sheriff's office that contained the identity of the man who dragged a 15-year-old girl under a willow tree and left her face down in the mud. Danny Houchins never turned 16. Her sister Stephanie grew up, grew older, spent more than half her life without her. Their mother, Cheryl, found her daughter's truck with the keys on the ground and spent 28 years carrying what that afternoon looked like. The answer came in the summer of 2024 in a lab report, confirmed 100%. The man who killed Danny was already dead by then. He had made sure of that 12 hours after 2 investigators sat across from him in a room in Dillon and asked him about Cameron Bridge. Justice arrived with a name, a confirmed match, and a press conference. It arrived without a trial, without a sentencing, without a moment where Stephanie could look at him across a courtroom and hear a jury say guilty. He took that from the family too, the same way he took everything else, quietly, on his own terms, before anyone could stop him. The case is closed. The file has a name in it now. Danny's truck keys and water bottle are no longer evidence without a suspect. They belong to a story that has an ending, even if the ending is the kind that does not feel like one. She was 15. She went to the river on a Saturday. She had a dry sense of humor, and she loved the people in her life by playing tricks on them. That is who she was. And it is what the people who loved her have been holding on to for 28 years, in the absence of everything else. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me until the very end. I know there are countless videos you could have watched today, yet you spent these moments here, with this story, with Danny. If this case moved something in you, if it reminded you how suddenly an ordinary afternoon can become something that a family carries for the rest of their lives, then I hope you will subscribe. It is free, and it helps these stories continue to be told. And before you go, I want to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you the longest? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. These words mean nothing without the hearts that receive them.